Please help me reach 1000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every of them. Thank you.
She asked for an open relationship. The woman I'd spent a decade building a home with. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I looked into her eyes, the eyes that used to hold my entire world, and the only word that escaped my lips was a quiet, almost chilling, okay. That was the moment I realized the man she thought she married, the one who would fight and grovel, was already dead. The kitchen light was too bright that night. It exposed every scratch on the table, every stain on the mug, and the glacial distance that had formed between Sarah and me. We weren't having a fight. It was much worse. It was a conversation held in a surgical calm. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was so steady, it felt like a deliberate weapon. "Michael," she started, setting down her cup, the one she always insisted on using, the chipped blue one. "I need to be honest. The intimacy, it's faded. I want us to open the relationship." For a surreal second, I waited for the punchline, for the familiar elbow jab and the laugh that always followed her bad jokes. But this time, the silence that fell was thick enough to suffocate in. I just sat there, staring at the woman who, until that second, I'd sworn I knew better than my own reflection. Her gaze flickered, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor of guilt in her eyes, a sign she knew the devastating weight of her words. That guilt, that tiny admission, was the only thing that kept me from shattering. It told me this wasn't an impulse. It was a decision already made, a chapter already written without my consent. The fight was over before I even knew the war had begun. She was waiting for the expected reaction. The storm of anger, the wounded denial, the frantic plea. The Michael she knew would have grabbed her hand, listing every sacrifice, every late night, every canceled trip we made for us. But the words I spoke were simple, a quiet resignation that sounded utterly foreign even to my own ears. "Okay." Her jaw literally dropped. It wasn't surrender, Sarah. It was the absolute, blinding clarity that hits you when the dust settles and you finally see the wreckage you've been living in. It was the terrible realization that I had been the only one holding the rope for years, mistaking my endurance for love. So I gave her the freedom she didn't ask for, but clearly craved. "If you need someone else to feel what we used to have, then I guess you should go find it." When she frowned and asked if it didn't matter to me, a painful, truth-telling laugh escaped me. Of course it mattered. It just mattered to the part of me that was now finally free. That night, Sarah packed a bag. Not a suitcase, just a small, stylish duffel bag. The kind you'd take for a weekend getaway, not for abandoning a decade of marriage. It was the casualness of it all that twisted the knife. She didn't cry. I didn't cry. There were no grand declarations, no accusations hurled across the living room. Just a sterile, polite transaction. She paused at the door, turning back to offer a mechanical kiss on my cheek, the kind you give an acquaintance you won't see for a few weeks. "This doesn't mean I don't love you," she whispered, a desperate footnote to her own destructive choice. I simply met her gaze, the new, clearer version of me replying, "It just means you love yourself more right now." And that was the final, devastating truth. We spoke to each other. When the door closed, I didn't collapse. I didn't rush to the window. I just stood in the hallway, suddenly aware of the silence. It wasn't the heavy, crushing silence from the kitchen earlier. This was a vacuum, the absence of tension. The freedom I felt wasn't triumphant. It was a quiet, deep-seated relief, like finally taking off a pair of shoes 3 sizes too small. For years I realized I'd been constantly walking on eggshells, anticipating her moods, editing my own emotions, begging for scraps of affection. Now for the first time, the house felt like mine again. Just me. And the terrifying, liberating thought was, that was enough. I spent the next few days in a strange, numb routine. Work, home, dinner, and the same old shows. The empty chair across from me was a stark reminder, but it was less painful than the person who used to fill it. mentally absent even when physically present. A week later, the first real test came. It wasn't a phone call, it was a text. A polite check-in. Hope you're eating well. Remember to water the jade plant. Nothing that sounded like regret, nothing that sounded like love. It was almost insulting in its banality. She was treating the dissolution of our marriage like a shared household chore. My instinct, the old desperate Michael, screamed at me to ask, "Where are you? Who is he?" But the new Michael simply looked at the message, a slow realization dawning. The distance between us wasn't measured in the miles she traveled or the people she met. It was measured in the things we no longer needed to say, because the emotional connection, the thing that demanded explanation and vulnerability, had already vanished. I deleted the notification without a reply. I didn't need to know the details of her life anymore. Her choices spoke louder than any text she could send. You can try to be the mature one, the emotionally evolved man who handles loss with stoic grace, but sometimes curiosity is just a primal urge. It took another few days, but one quiet evening, the urge won the battle. I opened her social media. It's a battlefield where people go to present their carefully curated victories. And there she was, the Sarah I hadn't seen in months, smiling, hair down, a genuine spark in her eyes that had been extinguished the moment we'd bought our first house. The spark of novelty, of being seen anew. And she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, his arm a possessive weight around her waist. Their bodies were pressed too close to pretend they were just friends. I stared at that picture. The screen's blue light illuminated my face as I waited. I waited for the heat of betrayal, the gut punch of jealousy, the explosion of righteous anger. I wanted to feel the pain, because pain, at least, is a connection. But nothing came. No fire, only a strange, deep-sea calm. And in that calm, the realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. She hadn't found something better. She had simply returned to her comfort zone. The need for constant validation, the hunger for attention, the chase for novelty, that was her true partner. And that, I understood with profound finality, was never me. My presence was stability. Hers was perpetual motion. She hadn't left me for him. She had left the Michael who made her grow up for the thrill of remaining a girl. It was just 2 days after that snapshot revelation that she showed up, unannounced. Her hair was damp from a sudden rain shower, her eyes flitting around the living room like a startled bird. She looked lost, uncertain if she even had the right to be there. "Can we talk?" she asked. I simply stepped aside and let her in. As she looked around, her eyes caught the details. The way I'd rearranged the furniture, the photos of us gone from the hallway, replaced by prints of landscapes I liked. She saw the new silence, the absolute, unburdened calmness that hadn't used to exist. "It feels different here," she murmured. I gave a simple reply that was a million miles from the husband she remembered. "It is." We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The furniture rearranged between us, forming a new, unbreakable barrier. Finally, her voice was a fragile whisper. "I didn't think you'd actually be okay with it." My heart didn't break. It simply acknowledged the statement. I shrugged. "You wanted freedom, Sarah. I just gave you what you asked for." That was when the mask cracked. Her voice trembled, raw with a strange mix of accusation and hurt. "But you didn't fight for me." And that was the line that brought a smile to my face. Not a cruel smile, but the definitive, liberating smile of clarity. You don't fight for someone who's already halfway out the door. The truth was clean, sharp, and final. Tears instantly welled in her eyes. And for a fleeting split second, I saw her. Not the version of her who chased excitement and novelty, but the beautiful, vulnerable woman I had fallen in love with, the one who once believed in us. But that woman was a ghost. She was gone. And what she didn't realize was that in accepting her choice, I had fundamentally changed too. The man who would have chased her, who would have begged and bled to keep love alive, was erased. A week later, another text. A final, desperate lifeline. Can we start over? I stared at the message. The old Michael would have said yes, immediately. He would have seen it as victory, the reward for his enduring love. But the man staring at the phone had learned something painful and ultimately liberating. Sometimes love isn't about connection. Sometimes love is just another word for control. The control you lose over yourself by letting someone else dictate your worth. The true lesson wasn't about her leaving. It was about me finally choosing not to be controlled by her presence or her absence. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked out into the cool, quiet neighborhood. My mind was finally clear, no longer buzzing with what ifs. I'd stopped waiting for closure. Maybe, I thought, this silence was closure. The next day, I handled the final, practical matters. I collected the relics of her life here. The perfume she'd forgotten, her old sketchbook, the pair of reading glasses she only wore when we were alone. I packed them into a single box. Then I drove to her new place. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I simply left the box by the door. No note, no grand confrontation. Just silence. The kind of quiet she never understood, but the kind she ultimately earned. 2 days later, she violated the silence. She showed up at my office. I was in a meeting, but when I walked outside, there she was, waiting by the parking lot. She looked exhausted. Not sleep-deprived, tired, but the kind of deep, internal fatigue that comes from the terrible realization you've ruined something permanent while chasing something temporary. I thought this would make me happy, she whispered, her voice hollow. But it doesn't feel like freedom anymore. It just feels empty. I nodded slowly. That's the thing about open doors, Sarah, I said gently. Sometimes the wind takes you somewhere you never meant to go. Her voice finally broke. Can we fix this? I took a long, steadying breath. I searched inside myself for any trace of the old, desperate man who couldn't imagine a world without her. He was gone. No, I said, the sound soft, firm, and final. We can't fix something you chose to break. She wiped a tear, looking at me as if trying to memorize the face of the man she had completely underestimated. And that was the core pain. Not losing me, but the shocking, unexpected realization that I was no longer going to chase her. As she walked away, I felt no anger, no victory, only a profound, solid peace. The kind of peace that comes from finally and irrevocably choosing yourself. I went home, deleted her contact, and sat in the quiet, realizing the final, most important lesson I wish I'd known years ago. Love doesn't die when someone leaves. It dies when you stop respecting yourself to keep them. And that night, I slept like a man who had finally let go.